Yay.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of Pax Americana. I'm Julie Roginsky here with Olga Lautman, and to all our friends in the United States, welcome to all our friends around the world joining us. Our weekly apology for the state of our union and how it is affecting your countries. But we are here. We just had a great show of anti-Trump Democratic small d and also large d strength at the polls on Tuesday. I feel energized, Olga. I want people to understand, and I've said this all along. I said this in my Substack today. The genius, the evil genius of people like Donald Trump is that he is basically a predator. And people like that want to make you feel like you're isolated. They want to make you feel like what you're experiencing is just you and that you are alone. And what we saw at the polls today was not today, on Tuesday, is Democrats, independent voters, and even Republicans joining from sea to shining sea, showing that we are not alone, that what we are feeling is experienced by millions upon millions upon millions of other Americans. And not only did we win in very blue places like New York City, but also in places like Mississippi, where Democrats broke the supermajority in the Mississippi State Senate for the first time in 22 years, in Georgia, won statewide state level elections, all three of them, beat back Republican ballot initiatives in California, which was to be expected, and in Maine, which is a very swing state, and in Pennsylvania, retained three judges, which will mean a great deal for how the 2028 election is handled when inevitably Donald Trump says it is stolen. I believe that he will continue to try to run for an illegal third term. Olga, I feel good, but your Substack that you wrote a few days ago is something that I think we need to talk about, because while we all feel good, there are things happening on the ground right now that are deeply disturbing, and it's domestic, but it does affect people not just in this country, abroad as well. So please tell us what's going on.
Yeah, it really, bothers me so much out of everything that has been happening since January and frankly since 2015 is the fact that you have very serious things happening in the background. And you would think with 24-hour cable news, instead of filling the news slots with shit and just repetitive talking points, that they would be addressing some of these things between the corruption, surveillance state, police state, and whatnot. So, to get to my Substack, last week, the Washington Post reported they received internal Defense Department documents, and they reported that the Pentagon is establishing or established a quick reaction force within the Guard that has to be ready and trained, fully equipped, everything, and ready for deployment by January 1st. Then they have another National Guard reaction force that they're training, which is for riot control training and should be operational by April 1st. Total, they have 23,500 troops that they want across all 50 states and U.S. territories for this force. The minute I saw this, what was my first thought? Russian Rotsgvardia. And for people who don't know, Rotsgvardia, and I actually named my Substack that, America's Rotsgvardia, is a National Guard for Russia. In 2016, I believe, Putin combined several units, several agencies and units under one, turned it into Rosgvardia in order basically to defend his regime. And to prevent any kind of disloyalty from coming from other agencies. And for anyone who's ever seen attempted protest in Russia, you'll see they have one quick reactionary force, which comes out dressed in all black. They look like Darth Vader times 1,000. And they're meant to quash protest immediately. Like they're meant to quash any dissent, any protest. I mean, in Russia, things are so strict that you come out with a blank piece of paper, literally, and get arrested. And we've seen many cases of this happening. The fact that you have the
Just
National
more black.
Guard,
They look like
The fact that you have the National Guard in the United States now putting together a riot control force, and that they want everything prepared January to April, and we have midterms coming up in November. I think they're planning something. I mean, first off, the National Guard is supposed to be there to help with emergencies, domestic wildfires, hurricanes, floods. They're not supposed to be dealing with any kind of riot control or law enforcement activity. And the fact that they're being trained specifically for this, 23,500 of them, and for them to, with the timing, I worry that this is tied to the midterms.
I want to just talk a little bit about the good old Soviet days, which I recall. And I have to say, everybody sometimes, not everybody, people sometimes say, "Well, you were young when you left," and so on and so forth. I was young. I was almost 7, but I do have to say that when you go through something like that, and it's obviously traumatic, but also just a very big divider in your life, you remember the pre-days of what happened after very, very clearly. So I think for a lot of kids, the years kind of run into one and runs into the other. For me, obviously, it doesn't. I have a very, very, very clear memory of the Soviet Union, and I also had parents who explained to me from day one what was going on, which they probably should not have, but they did, especially my father.
Well,
'Cause
that's very key
yeah,
because without these lessons and knowing what they went
right.
through, it wouldn't shaped
Yes.
who we are today.
True. I have a father who has no filter, which is sometimes a blessing. In this case, it was. And so I want to say, most Western countries have something called the police. And if you go to Italy, you'll see like Polizia written on the side of the car and so on, right? Here, obviously, you see the NYPD, New York Police Department. Russia, the Soviet Union did not have a police. They had it was literally called the militia, which is the militia, because it wasn't a police force. It was a militia paramilitary force that kept order in the Soviet Union. And when I see, Olga, what is going on here, what you wrote about, which I frankly missed until you sent it to me, and I think it's critical, and I think it's a disgrace that this is not leading every newscast in America. It should, but it doesn't. I think this is in some ways a little bit more important than Kris Jenner's new facelift, though she looks great. Um, but there are more important things in the world to talk about, and that is that we are creating a militia force um, in this country, and it's not semantics, right? You would think, well, polizia, militia, what's the difference? There's a difference,
Yeah.
right? There's a
We're
difference,
seeing it. We're
and we're
seeing
seeing
it
it.
right now.
Yeah,
We're seeing, between National Guard and federal agents, I mean, completely. And that's another thing in my Substack I get into the fact that the US, I remember hopping like mad and trying to sound alarm when there was one death in a Russian detention center. And I would sound the alarm. I would, make sure that everyone who deals with Russia knew about it. You know how many we've had? 20. 20 deaths. There are documented cases of torture. There are women being shackled, pregnant, denied health care, and bleeding to death and having miscarriages. These are all reports coming from Senate, from ProPublica, from NPR, and from various other organizations who are investigating. There are people being denied their insulin medicine. I mean, this is cruelty. This is pure cruelty and human rights violations. This is something that happens in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Russia, in Belarus, not in America. This is what America used to stand up against and sound the alarm across the world when regimes were carrying these kind of things out.
I'm going to tell you a story about what happened on Monday, which just comes to mind, and I think people who are watching us from abroad will be shocked, and people who are watching us in the United States may be shocked or maybe not shocked, but it really hit home for me. On Monday, I had to take my son to, I'm not going to name the hospital purely to protect the remainder of what I'm about to say. I had to take him for some tests to a hospital. He's totally fine. He's a little on the short side, so we were just checking to see if he needed, whether his growth curve was fine. but it was at an infusion center at a hospital in New York, and he had to just basically have an infusion of whatever say whatever they were putting in his testing to see what his growth chart is. However, at this infusion center, except for my son, who is mercifully healthy, everybody there was either for oncology or for hematology. And most of these kids were bald, and most of these kids had scars on their heads, and these were very, very sick children. Some of whom were getting chemo, some of whom were getting other infusions for other sick things. And I was there for about 3 hours, and there's not much privacy, so you see all these kids, and it's to say that it's heartbreaking is awful. It does not even begin to describe it. But at one point, this little boy came in, and I was telling Michelle Kinney, who was my co-host and who founded Mayday with me and is my co-host on Mayday Monday mornings and Mayday mornings and so on, this in real time. But this little boy came in, and he was very little. I don't know, 5, 6, 7. It's hard for me to judge. He was speaking Spanish, and his parents were speaking Spanish, and they didn't speak any English. And this boy was obviously very sick. And the only thing I could think about was that these people they only spoke Spanish. There was a possibility that these people were here, not legally. And then I thought about the fact that these parents could be grabbed off the street. And I don't know if this little boy was born in the United States or born elsewhere, but let's assume he was born in the United States. They would be separated, potentially.
Yeah.
And this little boy would be going to foster care or going to somewhere without his parents, who were clearly, I don't speak Spanish, but clearly were agitated and concerned about his medical situation. These are very sick children. And in the midst of watching these sick kids and my heart breaking for these sick kids, all I could think about was that on top of this little boy being very sick, there is, and I don't know, maybe they're here totally legally, and but I don't know. This is all I could think about, is that potentially this little boy would be losing his parents, his only caregivers, as he's going through something this traumatic. And this administration does not care.
They cheer it on. Opposite.
They
cheer it on.
And it was the day before the election, so I didn't know how it was going to go. And all I kept thinking is, I cannot believe that this is what we've become. Like, I just can't believe it. You read books about this. I didn't see it directly when I was living in the Soviet Union, because I never saw anybody grabbed off the street. I mean, it just, by the time I was born, it really wasn't happening in that way. My parents could certainly tell you about the knocks on the door during Stalin times. My grandparents certainly could, they lived it. They heard the knocks on the door, and family members got dragged out. But this is the United States. This is the United States.
Yeah.
I mean, we are kidnapping children and separating them from their parents. And it doesn't matter that this little boy did not speak, maybe he spoke English, I don't know, but the parents certainly didn't. They had a Spanish-speaking nurse who came in to translate, so clearly it was that, brutal. On top of dealing with whatever medical condition this boy had.
And you may not know whether they're here, if they're undocumented or not, but I can tell you from my tracker, I have documented case after case after case after case of children being separated, of one child being treated for cancer, of people actually having temporary visas to come in here to treat their children and being pulled off and separated and thrown into various detention centers. So, I mean, child separation is back. All of this is back. And the fact is, if they get off on committing this kind of cruelty, I mean, this is exactly what the Russian mentality is. I hate to say it, but this is exactly. Do you really think there's any military doctrine written that says that Russian military people should go into houses in a village in Ukraine and rape women, rape toddlers, cut their tongues out for not pledging allegiance or the national anthem to Russia and loyalty? torturing them. I mean, there's no doctrine in that. This is just the cruelty. They enjoy the cruelty. They enjoy, I mean, when it comes to Russian forces, stealing everything that's not nailed down, and the cruelty of the torture, of the rape, then, I mean, imagine who in their right mind would rape toddlers and then put it and circulate it through Telegram channels with Russian military
How
bloggers
do you even
promoting this.
how do you even have it in you to physically have the ability to rape a toddler? Like, how,
I
how do you get it to work?
I
Like,
I I
what
don't
kind of
know.
human being, like, think about that. What kind of human being do you have to be if you already don't have those kind of pedophilic proclivities and you're just a soldier because you're angry to do this to a child? Like, think about that mentality. But think about the mentality here in the United States
That's the problem. You're
that I
seeing the
am.
same
And
cruelty.
I'll tell you something. There's a reason why this family was at this particular hospital. It is New York City hospitals are fairly renowned, right? And are they going to just storm into these hospitals? Because the directive now allows them to do that. There's no more protection of hospitals and churches and
Nope.
anywhere else. And like, I'm almost loath to tell the story because I don't want to give anybody any ideas, but I mean, what are we doing here? This is a hospital that is set up. I cannot tell you how wonderful this place is towards these children. They make it. They have people coming in to ask if they want to play games while they're getting these infusions. There's a woman with a loom to see if they wanted to learn how to whatever you do with a loom. I don't even know. Sew, knit. I guess knit. I mean, the care that this place put into making these very sick children feel just a little better as they're going through this, and then to have to worry about ICE coming in and ripping these kids away from their parents. And when you see it, when you think about it, it's one thing. When you see this little boy, he has been just at the forefront of my mind since Monday. I just cannot stop thinking about him. I literally, if I spoke Spanish, I wish I did, so I could have sat down and just asked them what their situation is. I would take him. Like, I don't know what else to say. Like, I would take this boy if that ever happened to him and just continue to give him the treatment that he needs. But I don't, how does that even work? Like, it doesn't exist. They just separate these people.
And this is why I'm grateful for, well, half of the country made a mistake with electing Trump, at least people really Tuesday. I mean, that gave me hope seeing, mass turnout to push back against this. And I mean, this is against it all. The government shutdown, the cruelty we're seeing. I mean, I think most Americans recognize this is not America, and there is no way we want to be compared to a Russia. And the fact that I have to compare the actions that are happening in these black sites to Russia, or the actions by federal agents to how Russia's, National Guard operates, or other, agencies inside, makes me sick. This is what my parents fled, not for this shit to happen here, not for America to, you know, carry out the same human rights violations. I mean, frankly, if we were in a normal world right now, Europe and several other countries across the globe should be sanctioning us for what is happening.
For human
This
rights
is what
violations.
we absolutely, we would be doing this immediately. And there have been so many documented reports, not coming from Democrats. These are independent agencies, independent investigations. This is ProPublica and other news organizations who are systematically going and collecting evidence. Just like in Russia, there were many abuses uncovered by independent journalists who looked into what was happening at the detention centers, who spoke on background to people inside, who did provide them information. So this is something, I mean, if we were in a normal world, we should have been getting pressure for via sanctions for what we are doing here. And I think I am hopeful, because I've seen, protests and just people speaking up against this, that this is just Tuesday was just the beginning of what is happening, because this cruelty, this little boy, and I can't tell you how many countless kids, or what happened in Chicago, where they zip tied kids naked, ripping them out of a building. I mean, I'd freaking kill anyone who ever walked into my house throwing flashbangs and then grabbing, my kid out and throwing
And
him
these
into the
kids are
street.
largely American citizens, by the way. And
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
there's a part of that Chicago raid, which I can't stop thinking about, is there was a guy who lived down the hall from a mother and a daughter. The mother had come as an undocumented immigrant. The daughter was born here. When they heard the flashbangs, they ran out of their apartment and started randomly knocking on doors. And this guy opened the door. He did not know them. He was an American. He opened the door and they said, "Please, can we hide here?" And he said he just didn't even think twice. He said, "Go hide under the bed." And when the cops knocked on his door, he's just like, "Nothing to see here." I mean, Jesus, this is like Nazi Germany. This is Anne Frank. Like, this is
yeah,
crazy that a little girl, and he said to the little girl, she was crying, she was hysterical, "Please be quiet, please don't cry so that nobody can hear you crying." This is
yeah.
stories that
No,
we
that's
heard, this is stories that we read about in history books. And it's happening here. And I have to say, at least back then, you knew you could flee. If you made it to the United States, you would be safe. That is why you
yeah,
had all of these Jews trying to flee Germany back in the 1930s. That's why you had that horrible story of the St. Louis being turned away from the port, I believe, in Miami, and sent back to Germany. Most of the people died, which is a deep stain on Franklin Roosevelt's legacy. But at least people knew that if they came here, they would be safe. Where are we safe now?
yeah.
Where can we go?
No, 100%. And this, I again, the fact it's happening in US, people really like, people are waking up, and people need to wake up more, because this is really the tactics in authoritarian countries. And it shouldn't, when it comes to, human rights, like, there really should not be a distinction whether U.S. citizen, undocumented immigrant. No one should be freaking have chemical agents sprayed at them. No one should be zip tied and ripped out with flashbangs as if we're like entering an apartment building of terrorists in Iraq. No one needs to go through this on American soil. I mean, this is a human rights issue. And you don't like walk up. I mean, and not to mention the fact that ICE and federal agents, so I think we're up to case number 5 or 6, that they're shooting people. The last case was an American who tried to intervene and say there's a school bus about to pull out, and as he was walking away, according to his lawyer, as right now, the court case is ongoing. As he was walking away, the federal agent shot at him. All he was doing is saying, "Can you move this or speed up, because the school bus is about to arrive here, and we don't need kids traumatized seeing this insanity."
Yeah.
And that's it.
Well, let's move on to what's happening over in Europe, because, as I said, I don't know where you go anymore if you want to be safe.
Yeah.
Germany, which really, ironically,
Canada.
well, Canada, I guess, it will take us. It's cold up there, though. Um, but Germany, um, which was a bulwark to Russia, somewhat. They've had their ups and downs also for a long time. Things are getting weird over there, Olga. You had the AFD, which Elon Musk fully was in support of, and so was JD Vance, and effectively this administration and their allies were lobbying for the far right AFD to take power in the last German elections. They did not succeed, but it was still pretty harrowing, and they did well, the AFD. So now senior German officials say that the far-right AFD has been systematically using parliamentary inquiries to gather detailed information on Germany's military, cyber defenses, and critical infrastructure. And they worry that this information is being funneled to Russia. And defense and intelligence leaders over in Germany warn that the questions that AFD is asking as part of these parliamentary inquiries are mirroring the same interest that the Kremlin has. And some of these people are warning that the behavior is actually aligned with, and I quote, tasks assigned by the Kremlin. They're basically raising possibilities of high treason, that the AFD members are effectively working for Russia, a hostile foreign power, as opposed to working for the people of Germany. The Kremlin was never going to win a land war. It was never going to win a military war. So they decided instead to co-opt movements in democratic countries to serve their needs. You see that
Mhm.
here. Olga and I have an entire series called Active Measures. We are now through chapter 15. If this became a book, it would be probably War and Peace length by now, about their interference in the,
Okay.
yeah, and not the American version, not the English version of War and Peace, but the real one that's like 7 volumes. But they
That I
are,
had to read
yeah, we all have to read
because
in
of
Russian.
my dad,
Yeah,
who,
so yeah,
thought,
yep.
thought
I act
the
up.
U.S. education was not
Yeah.
up to par, and
Not a
I had
part.
to
You had
read
to read
that.
you had to read War and Peace in Russian. Actually, I will admit that that is my favorite book, so I did not mind reading it. I've read it many times, but nevertheless, we are approaching that level of detail on how Russia interfered in the 2016 election. They obviously also interfered in the German elections, and you see the results, which is that here in the United States, you have the administration serving Vladimir Putin's interests, and over in Germany, where the AfD was not successful yet, they have members of their parliament serving Russian interests. So what do you make of this, Olga? What do, you
Well,
know,
the reason I
what words are
chuckled
to say? Yeah.
The reason I chuckled, well, two reasons I chuckled. One, today, as soon as I finish, I am actually launching a series, me and series,
Yeah.
on Russia and the far right. I've been
Oh,
working on the far right across every single political
okay.
party in Europe and US. AFD is the one that I've did a lot of investigating and spoke with local officials and
Yep.
worked heavily in it. So I'm laughing at that I actually am literally launching a series on the far right, that will cover all of this too. The first thought I had after seeing this was Tulsi Gabbard, because I think this is exactly what is happening here with her and several other, Republicans and people in cabinet positions, and who knows where our intelligence is going. And it's not being hyperbolic to say, because the Europeans are asking the same questions of, what is happening with U.S. intelligence, and how much can they trust U.S. with intelligence. The third, AFD has been infiltrated by Russia, funded by Russia logistically. Um, they provide, logistical support for the AFD. There's another Olga, who recently, last November, she was a deputy for AFD. If I remember correctly, it was in Hamburg, Germany, and
Okay.
she actually suddenly fled back to her hometown of Omsk, which is my mom's hometown. She fled, and she was, a deputy in AFD, and clearly, German intelligence was moving in, and she realized it was time to pack it up and go, and ended up then on all Russian state media, saying that she fled Germany because she was being persecuted, and something with her child. Use the whole victim sob story lie about it. Um, so this is a big problem with the AFD party, and there's the reason that you see Elon Musk now moving in, with this. But this is a big, big problem with Russia compromising, you know, both the fringe left and the fringe right parties, in both in U.S. and across Europe. I mean, it's a,
Yeah, I mean, it's
I,
happening with Farage in Reform UK in
yeah,
Britain. It's happening certainly. I mean, there's a reason why
France,
France. There's a reason. There's a reason why Marine Le Pen cannot run for president herself. Why she has to have Jordan Bardella do it, because she colluded with the Russians, and the French found that to be unacceptable, and she's now barred from running for president. But took a tremendous amount of Russian money for one of her campaigns, and I believe it happened in I'm not sure about Maloney in Italy. You tell me, but I mean, it's happening, and not to mention Eastern Europe, left and right. Um,
yeah, Italy, actually, it's very interesting because Maloney, from what I've seen, I mean, she has her own far right issues, but she wasn't susceptible to Russian money. But then you had the Lega party that was, I mean, literally, I have
yeah,
investigations from it
totally.
where They were literally collecting money
Yeah.
and support from Malofeev's people, Komov. So you have this, and with the AFD, just the reminder of how insane this party is. It was what, 2 years ago maybe, that you had literally Germany and several countries carrying out a coordinated raid that wrapped up like hundreds of people. And it was because members of the AFD party, with this, freaking washed out monarch, were planning to overthrow not only the German parliament, but just the whole German system to install monarchy. And I mean, they literally went as far as setting up a shadow government, like, and having a shadow force ready with weapons, everything ready in order to overthrow a democratically German government and install a monarchy. And of course, the main person who was to take over the system and who was plotting this, of course, lived with a Russian woman, and of course visited the Russian embassy or consulate on several occasions. So I'm sure that Russia's fingerprints were all over this. Their violent coups are their specialty. They attempted, had a plot to assassinate the prime minister of Montenegro in order to put in their own people. They had a plot to assassinate Sandu and overthrow the whole Moldovan government in order to install their, pro Kremlin peeps into position, into power. So I mean, this is just something that is very expected from AFD. And it's also very interesting how, all these far right parties have aligned. This is problematic because you have the US MAGA movement aligning with AFD. You have Elon Musk, on top of doing other things for Russia, serving the interest, of AFD. He hey, call it, actually did campaigning for the head of AFD, who, by the way, this is a party tied to neo Nazis. So, I mean, again, you have this crossover with Russian neo Nazism and the far right, and we're seeing the same exact thing happening in the US conservative movement or whatever, this MAGA movement, whatever this is, same
Right.
thing.
When you're launching this today?
Today is going to be the first episode, but I'm going to go literally country by country. I have files on every single
And it's
political.
on. It's You're doing this as a video, or you're doing this as
I'm
a
doing it on a Substack as print, but we could bring
print.
it to life and
Oh, okay.
have a
No,
show.
no, just curious. Listen, that's amazing, and I can't wait to watch it. And this is on the Tyranny Tracker Substack or on the Masking Russia Substack?
Unmasking
All
Russia.
right,
Yeah, and it's going to.
you guys, anybody here, either watching on my Substack, if you're watching on Olga's Substack, you already know, but if you're watching this on my Substack or you're watching this here on YouTube, I'm telling you, and not just because I love Olga, but I seriously mean it. Please subscribe to Olga's I'm Asking Russia Substack and her Tyranny Tracker Substack. But if you want to watch the series or read the series, go to her I'm Asking Russia Substack, because it is critical reading if you want to know about what's happening in the world. So please do that. Seriously, you will feel
Thank
smart.
you.
You will feel smarter the minute you do it. And I seriously mean that. Okay, let us move on to what is going on with NATO, which apparently is, to NATO's credit, I think they've very much woken up in the last couple of years and understood that they only have so much time until Trump just pulls the plug. I'm surprised he hasn't yet. I thought he'd be done doing it by August, but maybe he's going to wait a little bit. But NATO has become, NATO, as you know, as everybody, if you watch the show for a long time knows, Russia has, of course, deployed drones by accident sometimes to fly over NATO countries, starting with Poland. There's nonstop drone activity over Poland, but also over Baltic countries like Estonia. I think, Olga, they've also gone into places like Finland and Sweden, if I'm not wrong, right? At least Finland. So
Right.
yeah,
Germany.
Germany. So yes, Germany, of course. So the
Everywhere.
reality is they're moving further and further from what used to be their traditional sphere of influence in Eastern Europe and the former Soviet Union to the West, including the traditional West, including places that were neutral until now, until most recently. Finland and Sweden just became NATO countries a few years ago. And of course, Germany, which has been the bulwark because it's, aside from Austria, the easternmost country of the West before the Iron Curtain came down. And now they're going into Germany for reasons that they're testing to see what the Germans do and what everybody else does. So NATO has begun deploying the Mirops drone hunting system to Poland and Romania after the surge of drone incursions. And this AI-guided platform, small enough for a pickup truck, lets NATO shoot down cheap Russian drones that's scrambling multi-million-dollar jets. That's good. That is all to the good. The good news is that they have technology that the Russians just cannot simply dream of having. If Russians had them, they'd be using them in Ukraine. They're not. So we kind of know what the Russians have. And NATO is using technology to good effect here, Olga. So,
and I think it's actually American system that that is being used. So even a better view to Russia. NATO's woken up, like you said, over the past few years. I think they had a jolt of several espressos since February when Zelensky got ambushed and kicked out of the White House, and they were like, "Oh shit, this is real. We now have to not only confront Russia, but an America with a figure who has loyalties." Not to the West, but to Russia. So they've really stepped up with this, and it doesn't help that Russia has escalated. I mean, not only have they sent drones across literally probably 15 countries on a nightly basis. I mean, you have drone incursions, every single day in one or two or three countries across Europe. You have fighter jets flying into European airspace, NATO airspace. You have surveillance planes. And then in the latest, which, if we had a functioning Pentagon who wasn't busy building Rosgvardia, maybe we'd actually hear from them about this. But in the latest, they for 3 nights you had drones over Belgium's military base, the Klein Brogel air base, and that base is believed to store U.S. nuclear weapons. Again, if we had a press pool, our press pool now in the Pentagon is Laura Loomer and the My Pillow guy and some other bunch of freaks. All the legacy media have been pushed out. Headset has shut down communications, which is unprecedented again. Even though, you and I predict these things, then seeing them happen, it's like, oh my God, this is like really, like, are we in America? But Headset has banned pretty much all communication between the Defense Department officials, anyone in Congress. So he cut off that, line of accountability. No press, no this. And as a result, we have Russian drones flying, 3 nights in a row. This is 2 days ago this happened. So we could be actually up to 5 nights in a row now over an airbase in Belgium that is potentially storing U.S. nuclear weapons. Not a peep from U.S. media, nothing from the Pentagon, no statement, nothing from obviously the White House, nothing from the State Department. So, unless you read this article in European news, they're covering it, you would be completely oblivious to the fact that, potentially if a drone falls into the airbase that's storing our nuclear weapons, then, we might actually have to get involved.
And look, we said Belgium has had Russian drone activity for 3 nights in a row. It's kind of nuts. Meanwhile, it's not just NATO as a whole that's preparing for potential war. Poland is going to prepare 400,000. I mean, that is a massive number, almost 500,000 volunteers for war by 2027. They announced a massive national military readiness program called, oh my goodness, Polish is hard, Gotowci. It sounds kind of like Gotovic in Russian, so I think it means
I know Gotovic.
I think it means, I know Gotovic, so I think it means readiness, not Gotovic like cooking.
Yeah.
Gotovic like readiness.
Gotovoshi.
Yeah. Yes, if anybody here is Polish and listening to me butcher your language, I am so incredibly
Sorry.
sorry, especially with my Russian accent. I'm doubly sorry. But anyway, it's aiming to train 400,000 citizens by 2027, in skills ranging from basic military training to first aid and survival and cybersecurity, which is really important. And it's basically framed as the most dangerous security environment since World War II, as it should be, because that's where we're living. And Poland has record high defense spending now. They're expanding their army very rapidly, new fortifications along the Russian and Belarusian borders. I'm sorry, it's Belarusian borders, but I would say Belarusian because that's really what they are. And these days, and efforts to deepen nuclear and U.S. security guarantees. Don't count on the United States, my Polish friends. The only thing I might say to you is there are a lot of Polish people of Polish descent living in the Midwest, so that might be a political consideration for Republicans, but pretty much don't count on it. Do not count on it. I hope that NATO steps up as a unit. The United States, I'm sure, will abandon Poland as they abandoned Ukraine. I don't care that Poland is part of NATO and we have Article 5 guarantees, and Poles fought very valiantly alongside the United States when we invoked the Article 5 guarantee in Afghanistan back in 2002. But look, I think Europe is very realistic, as it has had to be, because unlike the United States, which mercifully has been sheltered by its geography from fighting on our soil, real fighting on our soil since the Civil War, Europe, if you go anywhere in Europe, you will see markers about people. When you go to Paris, and they're everywhere, right? People being executed on street corners. And you go drive through the French countryside, and there's battle after bloody battle from wars. And you go to Krakow, which I've been to. I don't know if you ever have, Olga, but World War II is very prevalent. When you go to Krakow, it's everywhere.
Yep.
And that's before you drive a few miles to Auschwitz. So, and certainly Germany knows better than anybody else what monstrous decision making can lead to. So, you know, it pains me to say, because the United States was the guarantor for the Pax Americana, which is what we named the show for a reason, but that has led to 80 years, of peace on the European continent. I think that is coming to an end. What do you think?
I think it's up to the American people, because if the American people actually come out in numbers and vote and start pushing back against, the breaking of our alliances, everything domestically happening, potentially there could be some kind of a fractured version, that survives, if we manage to get this, Trump out by 28. And again, it's up to the people. There's, 300 plus million to what, close to 200 million who are eligible to vote. If people take this seriously and realize here, what is happening in the US, and make it their priority and their civic duty to push back and to vote and to do everything, this can be reversed. Even if we by a miracle, have a Democrat in place in 2029, will this, make Europe feel comfortable, or any of our allies? Absolutely not. After what has happened, it will take, not only, over a decade, it will take a few presidents. Like, it will have to be.
It'll be generations, because one time was a fluke, but we went back to that fluke voluntarily and willingly. 4 years from now, they are not going to trust.
No.
They're not going to share intelligence that could be then turned over to the next Donald Trump or JD. I mean, JD Vance must scare them more than Trump. I mean, JD Vance must be their worst nightmare. And so,
he's like a snake.
Yeah, well, not a snake. I mean, he's basically a Russian tool. I mean, the things that he said about Ukraine is insane.
Yeah.
So, it's brutal. Let's quickly move on to
the other side of the world, closer to us.
Yeah, let's quickly move on to what's happening in Venezuela, and also Nicaragua and Cuba. So let's talk about the Western Hemisphere for a second. The United States has escalated its military presence in the Caribbean, as they said they would, as certainly Trump has said, and our Secretary of State has said. Nicolas Maduro of Venezuela, has been appealing to Russia and China and Iran. How's that for an axis of evil? For urgent military aid. He wants missiles, radars, aircraft repairs, long range drones. This was leaked by US documents. And, Maduro was basically saying to them that this is a shared ideological threat. And he's not wrong, or at least it will not be perceived as being wrong by China, Russia, and Iran. I will say this about Maduro: he is there illegally. He is an illegitimate president. Venezuela has been taken over in a coup by somebody who lost an election. And the people of Venezuela have been suffering for decades, and they should not live under that kind of regime. However, I'm not sure what we're doing there. If we're there for regime change, just tell us and go to Congress and ask for a declaration of war. But Trump is not doing that.
No.
So, in the same way that Saddam Hussein was a horrible person, the Taliban were horrible people. They're back. Iran is a disaster. Russia is a disaster. China is a disaster when it comes to human rights violations. Putin is there illegitimately. He has not had a real election in decades. Certainly the same goes for Iran, which doesn't allow people to run who might otherwise win. The less said about China, the better. And there are human rights violations left and right. So Maduro is in good company.
Oh.
But
yeah, we have plenty, dozens of countries across the world who, have installed thugs and who just stay there.
But if we're in the regime change business now, that's a new one for the peace president. That's a new one for a guy who said consistently that he wasn't going to get involved in other people's business. That's a new one for the America First agenda. Just tell us. And great, because right now we've got a man who is willingly hosting Russian and Chinese and Iranian, potentially even military advisors, but certainly their not their personnel maybe as much, but their assets on soil that is not so far from the United States. And now, of course, after a stop in Caracas in Venezuela, a mysterious Russian plane flew to Cuba and Nicaragua. Two other places that do not have much love for the United States, or at least their regimes don't. It's a Russian Il-76 cargo plane, and it was linked which was linked to sanctioned military transport networks. And it, they are operating here just as much as we're operating in what they consider to be their sphere of influence, Eastern Europe. So, it's not the next time Trump blows up a boat off the coast of Venezuela, just understand that it's not just about Trump committing murder without any authorization, which is what he's doing, but it's also about the fact that that is giving impetus to our geopolitical enemies to start playing here as well.
And the fact is that, they have been playing. Russia, last week on our episode, we actually reported about this cargo plane that went through, sanctioned, by the way, that went through Africa and then made its way to Venezuela. Normally, in the good old days, they would carry Wagner fighters and, and military equipment for. Maduro, also advisors in 2019 when he was in serious jeopardy. Russia stepped right in, provided not only FSB came running, which is Russia's, federal security services, the after KGB, they came running with senior advisors to make sure to do everything to call the protest and to assist him logistically at home, delivered Wagner fighters and whatnot. This time, we don't know how much they'll be able to, dedicate personnel because they are involved in a genocidal war. So they might not be able, but they still can send drones, they can send missiles, they can, definitely arm them. And it is important to remember every single weapon that Venezuela has. Probably not every single, but probably 90% is Russian weapons. This is, one of their big clients. And it's also important to remember that Russia, years ago, I believe it was 17 or 18, that they agreed, at least publicly, with Maduro regime to host their nuclear missiles in island off of Venezuela. So they have close cooperation. I'm very curious to see what happens with Trump because Trump is playing all big, executing people, random people. We don't know who they are. He's provided no evidence. No one has, not even two Republican senators who are like, "Who are we killing?" And the Pentagon is saying, "Mind your business," basically, and not answering them. Um, I'm curious to see what's going to happen with Trump because if Russia and China indeed his, BFs and and regimes that he aspires to be, if they actually do get more involved in Venezuela, will he suddenly back down and start making a reverse course, or will he continue to and then end up potentially fighting in a proxy war against China, Iran, and Russia? I'm very curious about that because this is interesting that Russia kind of send a shot shots fired to Trump, like, hey, we're here. And I want to see what happens, whether
Yeah.
whether he'll go forward or he won't. It'll be interesting.
Yeah, I want to stay. We're running a little short on time here, but I want to stay here in the Western Hemisphere for a second and end the show where we started, which is here in the United States. And we talked about this at the top of that show. Election day was on Tuesday here in the United States, and it was a wonderful day. But there were, and I'm not sure if people know this, there were multiple bomb threats at polling locations across several states. At least 7 counties in New Jersey alone. New Jersey had a very what was perceived to be, but did not end up being a tight election. So what ended up happening was that these bomb threats, of course, were sent back and assessed to be coming from Russian email domains. Olga, you and I could have, we didn't need the FBI to tell us that.
No,
Of
no.
course, the Russians wanted to screw around with our elections. That's what they do. And if you don't believe us, read our active measure series on Substack. But of course, the Russians were responsible for this. Now, the part that concerns me, Olga, is I'm very glad the FBI has told people this. But
I'm
what's fascinating,
shocked.
yeah, I'm shocked. I'm also shocked they have counterintelligence people left to make that assessment because, for the most part, they have redeployed their counterintelligence units to deal with the quote unquote crisis at the border. These are people who are trained to spot Russian disinformation campaigns, trained to spot terrorists, people who are here to prevent another 9/11, people who are here to prevent Russian espionage, Chinese espionage. They're now all being deployed to the border, and there's very few of those programs left to actually deal with the threats this nation is facing. So if Russia wanted to interfere in these elections, Donald Trump is making it very, very easy for them to do.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, literally, we could have, written this prior. The first thing I heard, bomb threats. I've already learned it's always safe to blame Russia, um, and chances are it will be Russia. And even on Twitter, like the minute I saw the news, I was like, "Oh, look, Russia's up to its old tricks." Sure enough, yesterday reports came out that indeed that these bomb threats came from Russian emails. Interestingly enough, that the initial reporting was that the police in Jersey, which has made my head scratch to drop, because I was like, police are investigating, cyber attacks and bomb threats. Apparently, Jersey does have a good
Jer-
cyber
Jer-
security
yeah.
squad
So let me
within
say
their.
this. Yeah, New Jersey does have their own homeland security situation, just so you know. So yeah.
So, so the police were the first to trace this, and I was like, good for them. And then, interestingly, the FBI issued just a very plain, short memo, that they are aware of the bomb threats that were being called, and that it is linked to Russian domains. I even looked at the phone number; it actually came from Cash Patel's office. Maybe it's when he was on his, FBI jet going to a concert on our tax time and didn't realize his office put out this advisory. Today it's still up, so interesting. But yes, this is, luckily, what I think happened is that the polling showed that it was going to be a very close race, and even I think take Russia out of the factor. If you would have gone on Twitter, every single MAGA influencer was telling you that people in New Jersey were rigging the election and that they were in plain sight cheating, and that, polling stations were denying people the ability to vote, and that this was, I mean, every single conspiracy, even freaking the pillow guys tweets were popping up on my timeline. Thank God both Virginia and Jersey were 12 and 15 points difference, and it was not close. But like MAGA was hoping, like Russia was hoping, like every other adversary, that this was going to be a close election so they could start spinning election conspiracies, in order to discredit elections. And had it been 3, 4 points, we would have seen this. The fact that it was 13 points, it's kind of hard to say, that this is a rigged election. But
Yeah, it's interesting. Trump didn't go down that road, which I thought was very interesting, because I guess you can't really say that Democrats rigged the election in, I don't know, Mississippi, right? It's a little hard to rig elections in Mississippi for Democrats.
under his watch,
On
under
his
his
watch, on
watch.
his watch. So I'm
Yeah.
surprised he doesn't say that, but these were landslide whoopings that Republicans got. And I will end on a very positive note, because I have to go, unfortunately, I have a call. But yeah, I mean, from sea to shining sea. And
Yes.
do not get despondent. Do not get depressed. Stay vigilant,
No.
which is what we always try to do here.
Focused.
Focused. Read Olga's. I can't wait. I personally cannot wait to read Olga's new series. I love it. I want to actually bring you back here to talk about it, because I think it's so important. So go to Unmasking Russia, Olga Substack, and do that there. Somebody in the chat asked if we're only doing this here now on YouTube. No, we are actually streaming right now. If you go to Substack, on both Olga's and my Substacks, or at least on mine, and Olga will send this out via her Substack later. So I think we're also streaming at yours, Olga. But so we have, the only reason we're doing this here is we're expanding the audience to YouTube, in addition to Substack, which we're really happy to do.
And we'll
So
send out the show notes with all
we'll
the
send out the
links to
show notes
everything we
yeah,
discussed.
later today. So on
Mhm.
that note, thank you so much, all of you, for joining us. We cannot wait to see you again on Monday in your inboxes for Active Measures, on Tuesday morning for our Active Measures series over on Substack. We're almost done with that one, I hope. We were about, I think maybe we'll get to 20 chapters, Olga, and we'll call it a day. And then we'll see you all back here.
Yeah, we have like about 4 or 5. Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll see you back here.
If anyone knows a book, what is it?
A book
My God,
editor, a book agent. We got a book, my friend.
agent.
Yeah,
That's
let
it.
us know. Let us
Let us
know.
know. We'd like to publish it so
Yeah.
it goes further than our Substacks.
Yeah. Okay. So on that note, we will see you all later, and we'll see you back here on next Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern, for another episode of Pax Americana. All right, everybody. See you guys. Bye.
Bye.